regulations be laxed on emissions. And I would say that although that's been disheartening, the fact to see how the world and maybe the environment can naturally bounce back when we start changing our behaviors, and the air quality improvements that we are seeing in parts of the world does give me hope. You know, not only are we going through a climate crisis at the moment, we're going through a human crisis, a social crisis, racial inequities, social justice, and I think just recognizing that these are linked. And I think that we have all read and learned that, you know, unfortunately, the communities that have the least are going to be those that are affected by climate change the most, especially those in Black and Brown communities. And I am recognizing at this moment my own cultural heritage and recognition that I want to help solve these problems that we have coming in the future for our societies. But I am inspired by those individuals that are stepping up, those frontline workers, and just individuals that are getting beyond this moment of everything feeling overwhelming and stepping up to make a difference in what's happening right now. And I think Margaret Mead said it best, to never doubt the impact that we can have as individual citizens on the world. And in times that can be the only thing that really makes true change. I think my stubbornness and determination for making a difference in some of these situations that we're in right now comes from being a stubborn farm girl from Missouri who grew up on the land, getting dirty in the creeks. And it was that deep connection with our natural environment that has made me want to protect it, to make it better, to give people the same experiences that I had with a deep connection to the land. And it's what made me want to become a landscape architect. As Todd mentioned, I'm principal at CMG here in San Francisco. This is what we look like when we're in the office. I miss those people a lot right now. And our mission is to increase social and ecological well-being through artful design. I've had the good fortune of working on a lot of local projects over the years. Some of those which first got me interested in the topic of climate change. Treasure Island, which is under construction right now, is actually the first project that helped the movement to set sea level rise guidance policies within the Bay Area. I'm working with BCDC on the Bay Plan Amendment. And then more recently, over the last couple of years, I've been helping to lead the San Francisco Seawall or Waterfront Resilience Program. So that's where I started with this, 6 or so years ago, maybe. And as Todd mentioned, I started to ask myself as a landscape architect, is there more that I can do beyond just working on adaptation projects? We know we don't have a choice. Sea levels are already rising. We have to adapt to that. But is there anything that we can do that actually is tackling the causes of climate change, tackling the greenhouse gas concentrations that are in the atmosphere, which are causing climate change impacts and the situation that we're in right now? And I started to try to understand it for myself, what our impact is on the work that we do every day. And there are folks that are starting to wrap their head around the impacts of the whole built environment. Architecture 2030 tells us that, about 75% of annual greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the built environment, which are increasing temperatures, decreasing air quality, increasing fires, as we know, especially here in the Bay Area, and are leading to sea level rise. And, the opportunity really is to start recognizing what are we doing as part of the designers of the built environment, and knowing that 36% of those emissions for the built environment are coming from outside of the building. And we contribute to that as landscape architects and urban designers through the materials that we select, the operational emissions that are things like fertilizers and maintenance over time, gas-powered equipment. The materials that we select have embodied carbon in them. So the carbon emitted that it takes to manufacture and process and transport those materials to our sites. But we also have this unique opportunity as landscape architects because we have this opportunity to sequester carbon. But there's been, obviously a big question about, sorry, I'm working with my screen here. so I can see all of you. Can you see your faces on my screen? No? Okay, perfect. All right. All right, but the question for me has come up about, how can we measure those impacts? How can we improve them? And how can we sequester or take more greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere? And we have this great fortune of the sort of one of our tools in our everyday toolkit, trees and plants can take CO2, one of the largest greenhouse gases, and take that through photosynthesis and convert it and store it in the wood and biomass, or sink it down into the soil in long-term storage through the carbon cycle. But for me, as I started getting into this about 4 years ago, I just found stumped thinking that, oh, if I wanted to understand the impacts of my projects, I could just go online, get some magical tool, and it would tell me what the impact of my projects are. But the reality was that I came up short, that there really isn't a lot of tools or guidance or resources to help us improve the impacts of the work that we do every day. And I started to formulate our own unique, I guess, formula of what it means, what a landscape carbon footprint means, that there are these indeed sources of carbon through the embodied carbon materials. We take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through carbon sinks, but then we also have emissions that happen over time. So looking at this equation for us specifically was important because it is quite different than architecture or other disciplines. And then starting to look at, what are these basic strategies that we can start implementing into our work to reduce carbon footprints. So we know these high-level strategies like making our cities more walkable and more bikeable but then there are some other strategies that are less familiar to us, like minimizing soil disturbance. Every time we grade the soil, we let the organic matter decay and we release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. We know we can use more like local or reclaimed materials, use cement substitutions in our concrete, and also potentially incorporate biochar into our soils that can hold carbon for long periods of time. There's also ways that we can increase carbon sequestration, like planting more just in general, anywhere we can, whether it's green roofs or also looking at super sequestering plant materials like bamboo, but then getting down into species in terms of knowing that more biomass can store more carbon, swapping out areas of lawn for shrubs, and then restoring or protecting our natural ecosystems. So to start understanding this, how I began was a fancy spreadsheet basically, and started looking at our projects at CMG. And as many of you probably are very sustainably minded, think that, I can't imagine that what we're doing in our work could be much better in terms of its environmental impact. But for the first time started to measure that carbon footprint of those projects. And so this is a small couple-acre waterfront park, and the red number shows you on the lower left-hand corner how many metric tons of CO2 is emitted by this project and how much carbon we would be sequestering. And so this project would take us itself, it would take about 15 years to offset the carbon footprint that we caused by building this park. So I guess for me, that was pretty shocking. I really didn't think that my projects were actually causing any harm. So it was a real moment of self-awareness. But then when I started to understand and look at the numbers and look at the choices we're making, realize that we could make some kind of minor changes and substitutions and materials, some design choices that could actually have a pretty significant impact. And so by using materials with lower embodied carbon, like instead of asphalt, swapping some of that out for stabilized crushed stone paving, by using more shrubs instead of lawns, adding some more trees, and reducing some materials that have high embodied carbon, like foam, for example. This project, you can see the amount of CO2 that was instead not emitted. So by reducing the CO2 emissions by 200 metric tons, increasing carbon sequestration by 600 metric tons, and then this project would have instead offset its own carbon footprint in 5 years instead of 15 years. And you can see that the design didn't really change that much at all, but it has a much better environmental impact. And started looking at urban projects more more concrete intensive, more paving. We know that a lot of these sites require more paving for their program, like farmers markets and things like that. But it was shocking to see that this project is about half an acre, would take almost 200 years to offset its carbon footprint. And again, these projects were built, so there was nothing that I could do about it at the time, but it was informative to look at how this project again could have changed by increasing planting, adding trees, using cement substitutions, using materials with lower embodied carbon like wood instead of concrete. That project, instead of taking 200 years to be offset, could have taken 20. So again, the project design really didn't change that much. It was just kind of greener at the end of the day and much better for the environment. And so what I started to do is wonder, is it enough just for me to do this to my projects? But what if every landscape architect in the world was making these simple changes in their projects? Could we actually make a real difference? And so if you were to take our sort of business as usual, those first kind of before projects that I was showing in the case studies, and you extrapolated that to all 75,000 landscape architects in the world, what you would see is that our business as usual has us likely emitting more CO2 than we're sequestering. And that, over the next 30 years, that could be upwards of, that we're putting maybe 200 million metric tons into the atmosphere beyond what we're sequestering. But that if we can start making those small changes in our projects that I was showing in those case studies, we can, instead of emitting that much more, we can actually take out upwards of a gigaton of CO2 out of the atmosphere by the year 2050. And we can take out more CO2 than we're emitting by the year 2030 if we start making these changes right now. And just to give you some context of that, it's not a silver bullet. We know we have to reduce emissions and increase carbon sequestration to prevent the 1.5 and the 2 degree tipping points. But that 1 gigaton would put our professional impacts and contributions into the top 80 solutions in Project Drawdown, if you're familiar with it, by Paul Hawken, where he explains 80 solutions that when combined over the next 30 years can actually start to reverse global warming. So that's our goal, is to be part of that solution. And so to help us do that, I was selected, as Todd mentioned, as a Landscape Architecture Foundation Fellow for Innovation and Leadership 2018-2019 to further the research that I had started. And I launched Climate Positive Design with the goal of improving the carbon impact of the built environment through our collective action, and providing tools, guidance, and resources to help us lead in the ways that I think that landscape architects need to be leading this charge, to help empower ourselves to make these changes in our work every day, give us ways to collaborate, and also have the resources available so that we can educate others as well. It's grown from something that I started on my own, and my poor husband listening to me a lot, to a group of over 40 people that are contributing in various ways, from CMG. Atelier 10 has been amazing partners to work with, but also collaborating with advisory partners through various organizations. But obviously I'm a landscape architect. I have no tech background, and so collaborating with those that know how to make apps and understand graphics and visual communication as well, and that spans now around the world. This is a global initiative. These folks are all advisory partners to the initiative, so they review the data collected on a semi-annual basis and provide guidance on how we are meeting our goals. So as Todd mentioned, in last fall, I was inspired by the climate action events happening around the world and Greta Thunberg, and really realized that I had to push the app out and launch the Climate Positive Design Challenge. And so the challenge is for us in all of our projects to meet these goals of being climate positive. So for parks that are greener, like, or projects that are greener, like parks and gardens, campuses, or hospitality, the goal is for those projects to offset their carbon footprints within 5 years of being built. And for projects that are inherently more hardscape focused for those projects to offset their carbon footprints within 20 years. And that's all with helping us to accomplish our goal of contributing climate change solutions. And so how you all can help contribute to this is by using the free web-based app that I developed through the fellowship called the Pathfinder. It's an app that helps designers reduce the carbon footprints of their projects and increase carbon sequestration. As I mentioned, I partnered up with Atelier 10, environmental consultants, to help make sure that all of the data was aligning with industry standards. And the main data sources are for materials coming from the Athena Impact Estimator and carbon sequestration data from the US Forest Service. I'll also just point out on the website, there is a data report for anyone that's interested in just diving in and learning more about carbon sequestration or how kind of the back end of the app works. And when I was part of the fellowship, I had the wonderful opportunity of having a close cohort that I could ask questions. They'd be really honest with me about it. So I asked them what it would take for them to change as practicing landscape architects. And they said, I would need something that was easy for me to use, that it could integrate directly into my design workflow, and that I would have to know, I'd have to get feedback to know that what I'm doing was making an impact. So that was the premise essentially that the tool was built on. So you really just need quantities, area takeoffs, material takeoffs from your project. So it can be a quick concept sketch that you just do. I think Preliminary is the way that you do takeoffs, or AutoCAD. And so you just input your quantities of your materials, and automatically numbers populate for your carbon emissions. So you can see the red numbers here is the emissions from those products that or materials that you're inputting. Then you also provide plant quantities, and that populates your carbon sequestration data in green, and then also maintenance operations. So you can select between the kinds of equipment that you're using, whether it's gas powered or electric, the types of fertilizer that you're using, and it's constantly giving you this live years to positive score, so you can see how you're doing with every choice you make. There is a new version that just did a soft launch today/yesterday, and so there are a lot of improvements for those of you that maybe have used the original app that had improvements made to it, but the ones now that you can explore in the app is you can compare different design alternatives. You can analyze existing conditions of your site and also start to understand more site impacts, like what it means if you're grading the site a lot or cutting down trees. What if you're reusing those trees and turning them into lumber or biochar? And it also accounts for material replacement over time. So we obviously, if a project's around for 50 years, you might be replacing some things. And in general, there's better data that's being collected. And so if you're a student, you can indicate that this is just a study, and so it's actually not going to be built, and we won't be taking that data into the overall kind of impact of the profession. And so when you get into the app interface, you have your projects page. And so all your projects are stored in one place that you can go in and edit them at any point in time or create a new project from this main interface. And to get started, you enter some simple inputs, title of your project, description, when its completion date is expected, your type of units, its phase, and whether or not it's an academic study or if it's actually going to be built. And then you can type in your project location, and the map takes you to your site where you draw the site boundary. And then once you're into there, there's really three main tabs: materials, plants, and operations. And so I'm just going to do a quick video of this. Oh. That doesn't seem to be working. Okay, video is not working. We have to do a live test, but in general, as I was showing you with those still screens of the app, there's these three main tabs. And so you just input your quantities, it live populates the emissions or sequestration for you, and then you're able to get a scorecard afterwards that shows you your overall impacts of your project. For a person that dabbles in tech.
Pamela, maybe if you push escape and then try it again, maybe, I don't know, maybe because you're in full screen mode, I'm not really sure.
Let's see. Huh. Oh, you know, it's, well, okay. Anyway.
So we tried.
That's how it goes sometimes.
We all have to do it now.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'll wrap it up, and then we'll see if we can circle back to this to do the live demo. But in the meantime, anonymously collecting the data, so we can start to understand now for the first time what our collective impact is as a profession. And so there's a backend dashboard that tells me how many projects we've logged to date around the world, and how many trees we're estimating that we're planting. For the first time, we can start to understand sort of our average CO2 emitted per area or average CO2 sequestered, and that can help us to set our targets going forward. That's information that we've never understood. So for example, I'm working with USGBC and on sites and leads credits that we're trying to understand, you know, do we want to say, okay, this is our baseline and we're going to improve X or Y by a certain percentage, or are we going to stick with kind of what the challenge is right now with these years to positive targets? And so we'll, you know, coming up on a year of collected data, that's going to help us understand how we can go forward. And really, you know, again, this is all about creating a feedback loop. So we start that when we start measuring what we're doing. We can understand through our individual impact in reducing emissions and increasing carbon sequestration. It's starting to inform how we design. We're looking for lower embodied carbon materials, plants that sequester more carbon, new materials, and ways of thinking and doing more with less, so creating a collective consciousness around carbon. We can also use this information to help set new professional baselines, realizing we need more tools, you know, to help support this effort in terms of checklists and toolkits. But we also need to be expanding beyond our silo landscape architecture and collaborating with others. This information can also help us inform, as I mentioned, accreditations, policies, codes, and standards. So talking with the city of San Francisco about actually, you know, could we start to say this is what our goals are going to be for every site in terms of how much sequestration we're trying to accomplish as a city. And then, of course, none of this is possible without all of us communicating about it and helping to teach the next generation of landscape architects. And so within the first 6 months, there were about 800 projects logged, about over 600 contributors, close to 500 companies in 46 countries. And the reporting within those 6 months was anticipated planting of over 500,000 trees, which will ultimately be the equivalent of taking, you know, over 300,000 cars off the road in the next 10 years, or close to 1 million cars off the road in the next 30 years. So this is why collecting this data, now we can start to show what our impact is as a profession, and it is pretty significant, actually. The web resources are also kind of being accessed around the world, which is really exciting as well, to see that a lot of people are interested in taking action. And we're starting to see that projects are improving in terms of the years to positive, from the first 45 days to, you know, the overall 6 months. The over years to positive score is getting better, which is really promising. And again, as I mentioned, just this awareness of our own emissions and how we're going to continue to improve is really powerful. And just us, I think, you know, beyond the data and the stats and the app is now this thought about, what can climate positive design look like? How can we design our cities to sequester more carbon? How can this be inspirational? How can we get clients on board to do this? How can it look different and exciting? And how can it help us make a stance for what we believe in this profession and get other people excited about? So this is what the walls in our office looked like when I was back at the office. And we're starting to think about this in terms of design materiality. How can we, we're using more wood, which has lower embodied carbon than a lot of materials, different ways that we used it before. Looking for more things on the site that we can use. This is out at Yerba Buena Island, where we found a ton of boulders. And so we changed the design to be, really about celebrating these elements that were on site, which have a lower carbon impact. Looking at all levels in terms of early master plan designing, from just outlining best practices at a really high level that start to make it easier to accommodate these goals as you move through the design phases of the project. And so just a couple examples of, this is the scorecard that populates through the app that you get that shows your overall project impacts. And you can start to see, even with the best practices in mind, this project, we was 13 years of positive when we started, but we started toggling down like, okay, well, what else can we change? Can we maybe add cement substitutions? Let's not use poured in place rubber, and then instead of using appropriate mulch that's playground compliant, swapping out some features. And we started to see we can make more improvements to the projects. We picked up on those changes. Then we started, saying, okay, what else can we do? And you can start to see the years to positive score improving, and the emissions reduced, and the sequestration increased. So that went from 13 to 10 years. And then we kept pushing further. Can we add some more trees? Can we get rid of our high maintenance lawn? Can we use electric equipment instead of gas? And continue, you can see the score goes down till ultimately we get down to the 4 years to positive. By also reducing the paving and increasing planting will help us to get to our goal. And so I think that those strategies can be implemented very early on. It makes it a lot easier and helps start the conversation with clients. These are other ways we're looking at. This is a different project, but also just making it really simple for clients to understand, maybe in ways that they already kind of get, and they don't know that it's related to carbon, like material reuse, afforestation, using materials with lower embodied carbon, and minimizing site grading. These are all carbon strategies, but very relatable to clients that generally they are supportive of those things. And so in this project, we could start to see here the carbon impacts of just those choices and selections. And so from our kind of baseline project, you can start to see that we decreased our emissions by 50%, increased sequestration by 60%, and went from 21 years to positive to 6 years to positive. And again, it's a good design. It's just much better performing from a carbon standpoint. And again, just kind of giving you all some examples of how to start communicating those to our clients in simple ways. And this is, I would say, it's just another tool in our toolkit as designers, and it's constant. The earlier you start it, the better. But it needs to be part of your design process. It's just like doing a pinup and getting a critique. It needs to be part of the evolution, making the changes so you can doing the analysis so you can let the design evolve, and then communicating that to your client in the presentations. And then once you have that kind of like rhythm down, it's kind of normal. And so we're incorporating to all of our projects going forward. And beyond that, I think that there's also a lot of other things that we can do and advocate for climate action, whether it's writing about it or talking about it or striking about it. There's lots of ways that I believe we can get involved. So I think just in closing, as I mentioned, there is a new version out for the app, check it out, but it's going to keep evolving. This is obviously not perfect, but the goal is to keep adding more plant materials, more materials in general, potentially get products in there so you can actually select specific products, but then also really scaling this up and continuing to go beyond silos and let it change policies and you know, have it be a part of the global solution toolkit. And I think as for you all, there's lots of things that you can do in terms of using the resources on the website, spread the word. There's a suggestion box on the website. So if you see anything that you think would be helpful, you know, just drop it in the box. And then also asking your product manufacturers for environmental product declarations. That's one sheet of paper that basically says the global warming potential of that product. And so that's the key number that goes into the app. And so once we start asking for that more, people will be more inclined to provide them to us. And so it's sort of this chain reaction that we can all be a part of starting. I hope that educators can find these resources useful. And obviously there's different ways to donate or volunteer as well if you'd like to get involved. So the website is climatepositivedesign.com. I hope that all or some of you have found this useful, and I'd be happy to talk more about it if we still have some time. Sorry if I went a little bit long. But.
No, it's great. Pamela, thanks so much for your presentation. We've got 18 minutes to do questions with the audience. I'll kick it off, and then Blake and I will look through the group chat and facilitate a few more questions. But I guess to start, since you developed the app and it got pushed out in September, I think you mentioned that CMG is utilizing this app on all new projects. Mm-hmm. And perhaps you could give some advice on how you and your team at CMG incorporate this into everyday practice, and perhaps how you could break down the fear a little bit and how you actually get clients on board to have this as part of the process.
So there's a couple questions there. I'll try to answer all of them. Let me know if I skipped over one. So yeah, we are using this on all of our projects, no matter new ones that we're starting. And we kind of, it seems to work that we have at least like a designated person to make sure that, okay, we're checking in as the design changes. And so you can maybe designate one of the team members on that project to be responsible for the climate positive design analysis. And so as soon as you have a concept sketch, getting quantities and then going ahead and entering it into the app as soon as you can, just so you have this like sense ballpark where you are. And then I think it's good to have a person that's on that project, so they're kind of looped into like when the design is changing, or they know the schedule when you're getting close to a milestone. Say, okay, now we've made a lot of changes, let's update the quantities and get this into the app, and then see where we are and see if we need to make some adjustments before we go and present that that latest design to the client. And I mean, I think, honestly, we haven't had, maybe we're just lucky because we're in the Bay Area, but all of the clients that we've talked to about this have been like, not just receptive, they wanted like more. They get really into it. Like they want to have like, they want to get to zero. Like, I'm like, I don't know if that's actually possible. Like this, so it's cool. Like they get the idea of like, oh, there's this challenge and we want to support it. And so one of the projects that I was showing you, like they were the ones actually pushing us. And I was like, this is unrealistic, but that's cool. Because I think that people, I don't know, maybe I'm a Midwesterner at heart. Like I generally think there's a lot of good people out there that want to do the right thing. And so I don't know, I would just say it's worth a leap of faith. It may like feel a little uncomfortable if you're not really sure like where that client stands on climate change, that it's worth having the conversation. And then, if you get pushback, you can still keep doing it, frankly. It doesn't have to be something like you're shoving down people's throats or in their face. So it's more of like mindfulness, like being aware of what you're doing and making these conscious decisions as designers, I think. Did I skip over any questions? Okay.
No, that was great. We've gotten a lot of other questions come up. I have another one, but Blake, if you want to chime in with one, I'm totally fine with that. Can't hear you though.
Thank you. This one's from Rex. Are there any plans to factor in material costs when substituting more sustainable materials for your typical building materials?
It's a really good question, one I've gotten quite a few times. I mean, I think that there is a whole nother level when you start to get into cost, frankly. And I think when you start to get into cost, you're starting to get into cost per region. And like this being kind of at a global reach right now, it is really challenging for me as an individual who's making an app to kind of support this. My goal is to keep this free. There are, software platforms out there that factor in costs. So I'm not sure that that's in the cards for me in this, but I do think that that is a study that, you all can do. We all have unit costs as we're making choices. I think that's something that you could put into a spreadsheet, right? Of like, this is where your baseline design was, and this was the cost estimate. These are the changes we made, and this is the new cost. And I think that's something that anybody could probably do on their own and share that with the client. And I think that the reality is good about that is that because most of the time the lower carbon materials cost less. So, the most simple way to think about this is like, maximize planting, minimize paving. And the cost per square foot for paving is a whole lot less than the cost per square foot for paving. And so, I'm not doing that analysis. I don't think I could do that analysis for all of you, but I think it's something that we can all probably take on ourselves.
Cool. Rex gave a thumbs up on that. There are a lot of questions regarding influence of price, but
also, if anybody would like to go on video, I'm happy to see you too. So putting it out there. We're neighbors. What were you saying, Todd?
There were several similar questions that Rex asked. How to unite financial resources and all of that. But I think that would, as you mentioned, it'd be really complex. We'd really have to work with contractors and all of that, and so many regions throughout the world to really figure that out. But I guess we have to think about that a little bit more. And on your own individual projects, I would assume that you'd have to work with your CMs and GCs to really work on that, to hone in on those prices and look at alternatives throughout the process.
Mm-hmm.
Blake, did you see another one in there? Or if anyone wants to come onto video.
Yeah, I'll ask another one that we got from Margaret. She asked, there seems to be a lot of overlap with Bay-friendly landscape requirements. Many Bay Area cities require compliance with this. Have you applied this tool to any Bay-friendly landscape rated landscapes?
I haven't. I'll leave it at that. I definitely support those guidances, but I haven't done it myself. So if anybody wants to collaborate on that, just reach out.
Krista, you want to ask your question and put on video? Not to put you on the spot.
Don't have to do video.
There she is.
But you are on mute. Okay, there you go.
Sorry about that. So I wanted to bring up, I think this is a great tool, and I think a lot of times there's some differences that we see between landscape architecture and the idea of kind of digital technology. And I know like we've seen a lot of decrease in numbers in landscape architecture programs around the country. And you see like spikes that are going up within computer science or computer engineering, software development and design. So how do you think that you can use this tool to maybe encourage some of those students that are going in that direction to either consider landscape architecture or figure out ways to have minors in landscape architecture?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Krista. And I think that The way that I speak at a lot of universities, I'm a real sucker, like just can't turn them down. Sometimes it's like 6 a.m. But I really believe that, the next generation, this is their future, frankly. They're going to be the ones that are going to be dealing with what are leaving behind. And a lot of them are pretty passionate about the subject. And I think actually, from what I've heard from those students, that they feel like there's a way that they contribute to climate change solutions in being a landscape architect. And that for them is pretty powerful. And I know that there have been actually, some students that have actually gone back to grad school to focus on carbon sequestration and landscape architecture because they really believe now that this is how they can make a difference. And so I am hopeful. I think that there's a lot of space for us to step up as leaders in this space. And this is not a problem that's going away. But I think there's also this, making tools simple and easy to use is also kind of empowering too, right? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And the younger generation is really used to having apps around all the time, right? And so they're probably better at designing apps than like the older, obviously even me, I don't have a Twitter account, like I'm, so just having that basic knowledge of like, that's just normal in your everyday life, using technology that way to keep it really simple and help us make tools that can be, make us what we're doing more performative and actually maybe be more impactful.
Any others? I don't want to take over on the questions, but anybody else out there? There was a last question that came in just a little bit ago on cement alternatives and altering the strength of concrete and what that does. But I guess perhaps besides fly ash, and when one of your slides you showed biochar, I think. Any other thoughts on?
Yeah, that's a good question. And maybe because the live demo didn't happen, I might go on a limb here and see if I can just pull up the website to show a few other resources to you all
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
on the website. There is I'm sure it's not time. There is a design toolkit, which kind of complements the app. Where the heck is it? There we go. All right, so just show you a few things here that if you go under the resources tab, and I'll get to this cement substitution question, you'll see where I'm going with it. On the website, there is this design, there's a bunch of stuff here. So as I mentioned, there's a data report where you can learn more detail. There's a whole bunch of case studies, more examples of changes that you can make. And then there's a design toolkit here. And so it kind of breaks it up by different categories in terms of whether it's, pathways, planting, how do you want to reduce emissions, other co-benefits that are associated with some of these strategies. And so, in terms of cement substitutions, looking at whether slag, fly ash, silica, fume, glass, polyzon. So there's a whole slew of different cement substitutions that you can look at. And I always recommend talking to your structural engineer about them. But what they are finding is that, typically the strength is still there. It does take a little bit longer to cure. So you might have to have a little bit more patience if you can load it in your schedule. But I think that then architects are using these cement substitutions all the time. So I don't think we're getting to a point that this is becoming pretty standard in terms of the replacements. So anyway, there's a toolkit. It's a resource for you online.
Pamela, do you want to see if your video that might not be within PowerPoint might actually work for these last? We've got another 5 minutes.
That's a good point. I actually have that video on the desktop. And oh my gosh, there's so many things open. Sorry guys, you know how that is.
Yep.
Okay, that's gonna work. If I
Okay.
can figure out how to get us back to Zoom. I don't know if anybody else is. Oh, brutal. All right, here we go. Okay. And this is in the new app that's just out now. So, and then there's the three main tabs I mentioned. I'll just pause for a second, go back. So again, three main tabs: materials, plant operations, and there's stats that are constantly populating on the top as you're entering in data. And so you just scroll down. You can do a drop down for different material categories. There's about 80 to 100 different materials in there. So you can start to see if it's concrete with cement substitutions, whatnot. You quickly, add in your quantities right here, whether it's area and depth, and you see the red number populate. So that's your emissions from that material. This is a super fast video, by the way. You go to the plants. It's a range between trees, shrubs, lawns, wetlands. You select your tree, enter the quantity with the scroll bar, just enter it in directly, and you can see the green number populating the amount that you're sequestering. And at the same time, you can start to see in the upper left-hand corner, it's starting to tell you how much more carbon you're sequestering than you emit in the lifespan of the project, and how your project ranks within the overall database. And I would just point out that this is regional sequestration data, so you can see you would select your growth zone that your project is in, north, central, or south. This is globally extrapolated based on USDA growth zones, and it varies because trees that are in like a mild climate like ours have many more growth days per year actually. So the same species of oak that grows here versus, let's say, Minnesota is actually going to sequester much more over a year's time because it just has less growth days in a colder climate. So it's important to select that. Also, if you want to learn more about any of these inputs, you click on the little book and it tells you basic assumptions about that. So then you can also select shrubs or lawn and look between the different categories, whether it's minimal management to high maintenance. Again, putting in the area quite quickly. If it's, actually going back to that, if it is a high maintenance lawn, those typically end up being carbon emitters because of the maintenance and the fertilizers associated with them. So you actually see that that's a red number that populates here for the type of lawn. And then if you go to the operations tab, there are things like your types of fertilizer you're using, type of equipment, demo, as I mentioned, existing tree impact, soil disturbance. And so that's then that group. And you can start to select also grading, as I mentioned, has an impact. Fertilizer, good stuff. And then at the bottom, you'll see design suggestions. And so what you'll see is it'll start to recommend either species that will sequester more carbon or materials that could be substitutions that have lower embodied carbon associated with them. And then if you click the scorecard, this graph has been improved since this video, but again, it'll tell you your overall years to positive, your net impact of your project over 50 years, how much carbon emissions are associated with embodied carbon, how much are associated with operational, your emissions, and it starts to break down various aspects of the project. But you'll also notice when we're using the app, there's now a page 2 of this that breaks down all the material, all of the things that you input in your project and its overall info. So it's kind of a helpful reference to see or to share with clients. And you can start to kind of understand what has the biggest impacts in your project. So then I'll just point out each project has its own page, and you can change at any point in time here the project name, details about it, when it's being constructed, your units. If you click on the area, you go back in and draw the map in that live format. You can upload a photo of your own project, or you can let it be automatically selected from the internet. As you're going through here, you can duplicate versions. So if you want to like make one version and just modify it slightly, you can duplicate it and make some small changes. You just have to select one of these as being your primary design. So that is the one that would be like your data would be recorded, saying like this is the one that you think is going to get built. And you can create different versions and existing conditions within this interface. And then, as I mentioned, all of your projects are shown in your projects page that you can then go back to and edit at any point in time. And I realize now I just went over time, but that may have caused now more questions. So also open to, if anybody has more, to jump in there.
Yeah, that was great. There's one last question, and maybe we can stop with this one, but the question is, if you've considered incorporating drought tolerance of plant material, and perhaps even the thought on irrigation and water usage.
Yeah, I think that incorporating water is on the wish list to incorporate next, because there is inherently carbon footprint associated with water treatment plants, or if you're using potable water, getting that water to your site. So there is a carbon impact associated with that. It's not incorporated right now. To the drought tolerant planting, you see that that's on the design toolkit recommendations. Obviously, I mean, also from a water standpoint, but then also from a carbon standpoint, usually people always ask, well, what's the best tree to use? And the best tree is the one that is going to get the biggest and it's going to live the longest. And so it's not a certain species. It's really depending on your region. And so really by planting native drought tolerant plants, ones that don't take a lot of resources and their biomass gets the biggest and it's going to be around the longest, like that's what you need to do. So maybe it feels, I know we still want to know the species. I'm going to put together like the top 10, we have a list, which you can also get into more species information in iTree if you're interested in getting that level of detail. But the moral of the story still is there is less difference between species. It's actually that we need to just plant as many as we possibly can. That's the reality, so.
Well, we're a little over time. I can't thank you enough, Pamela, for your time. This was really great. And as you can see on some of the comments, that a lot of people are inspired and they're really excited to rethink the way that they are going to design from this point forward. So that is awesome. And as you said to me the other night, it only takes one person out of whoever comes to this to actually start doing something, and it'll have an impact. So
Definitely.
That's fantastic.
And so anyone, feel free to reach out through the Climate Positive Design website. As I was telling Todd too, happy to collaborate with folks on teams. If you feel like there's a certain, importance of this on your project and you don't feel like you have the capacity for it, I've collaborated with lots of other landscape architects. Martha Schwartz and I have been leading the charge of this, pushing this agenda for landscape architects and carbon sequestration over the last several years. So this is a team effort, and just want to let you know I'm putting myself out there.
That's great. I can't thank you enough for your time. Blake or Krista or Laura, is there anything that you'd like to say at the end here to wrap things up?
No, just thank everyone for coming today and joining us during your lunch hour. It was really great. And Pamela, thank you very much for presenting.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thanks again. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you at the next Lunch and Learn.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye.
Take
Bye,
care.
guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Pamela.